All right. So, um, good afternoon, everyone. Today is um, we're going to be having our 13th lecture today, and we're talking about APIs, and we are going to be specifically talking about RESTful APIs and some other key terms that we are going to come across. So, we are going to see what RESTful APIs are, or what APIs are. We are going to talk about what RESTful APIs are. Then we'll talk about what protocol these RESTful APIs used to communicate with each other, or what the RESTful API uses accept as its means of communication, which is going to be the HTTP. Then we're also going to talk about authentication and authorization. So I'm just going to talk about these terms and how they are being used and why we need to consider them. All right. What is an API? An API is a programming, it's the full meaning of API is application programming interface. It is a type of software interface offering a service to other pieces of software. So now it is a type of software interface, which means um, there are other kinds of interface. So you have your user interface, right? You have GUI, graphical user interface. You have CLI. You have that's a command line interface. You also have APIs. So these APIs are the full meaning is application programming interface. So it is an interface in which softwares can use to interact with each other. So um you guys I maybe once in a while in my I've wondered how does front end um maybe interact with back end? How does like what kind of interface do they use to interact? How do they um how do they understand themselves? Being that, okay, let's say for example, um I wrote front end in JavaScript, and probably I wrote my back end in with Python or another programming language. How do they interact? Like, there should be an interface in which these services actually interact with. So these services interact using the API, application program interface. Now, you as a developer, you're actually developing APIs. So you're developing what other people, other services, other platforms can interact with. So that's your work as an API developer. So API is just it's simply just back end. It's simply a service that um, accepts for okay, an API is just simply a service that accepts a request or accepts something, then processes it and then gives back information. It might not it might sometimes preserve the state, because we are talking about APIs in general, not just RESTful APIs. So there are APIs that might preserve the state, and then there are also some that might not preserve state. In other words, API helps you communicate what you want to to other systems so that they can understand and fulfill the request. So first, we another thing we need to understand is that a request comes to an API, and then that request has to be structured in a way that, okay, if it meets this particular requirement, then we can process this request. If not, if it doesn't meet that particular requirement, we can't process that request. So these are examples of API. So we have weather API, we have travel booking API, we have Google Maps APIs. So of course, weather API, as the name means implies, it means you can use this to get weather weather forecast or information about weather. This one, travel booking. Maybe if you want to travel to another country or another state, most times using aeroplanes, flights, there are booking APIs out there you can interact with. Now, this is important. It's important to know how to interact with APIs and even how to build it, because let's take for example you're building, if let's take for example you're a front-end developer and you want to build a weather, like a weather a website, like a website that people can come and see information about the weather, for example. And you might not necessarily need to, after building the front end, you come and sit and then try to write out the whole API, or maybe place sensors around places that should measure the weather. And all those things have been done by someone already. So instead of doing all that, you can just look for an API, a weather API. There are plenty of them out there. You just look for it and then you use their API. So that goes for the travel booking and all these other ones. So now, as a backend developer, you can build these APIs. You can build these APIs. So you're building these services that stay somewhere, that runs somewhere on a server, and it's just waiting there for requests. And when a request comes that is valid, it processes that request and then sends back a response, which is like the information for that particular request. Okay, then what are RESTful APIs? REST itself stands for Representational State Transfer. Now, it's a software architecture style that was created to guide the design and development of architecture for the World Wide Web. So REST APIs are concerned with World Wide Web, www. So if you're designing an API that will run as an API for maybe websites to communicate to, and you're going to run this on a server online, then you're most likely to design a REST API, which is actually what we are going to do in some maybe in our next class, or yeah, in our next couple of classes. Now, REST has been employed throughout the software. So yes, we've been using REST API to like for example the weather API. That is an example of a REST API because it runs somewhere on a server and then it's just waiting there as a service for other people to use or consume. Now, one thing with this REST API is that REST API doesn't preserve states. Let's say you send a request to this REST API for like you send a request once and then you want to send a request again. That REST API doesn't it doesn't record that, okay, see, you've sent this request and you're still the same person that is coming again. So it doesn't preserve the state of that particular let's say from your former request. It doesn't reference the former, like the state from that former request to maybe get information to process your next request. So REST API is a kind of stateless API. It doesn't have any state. So okay, so we said when we say REST API are stateless, what do we mean? So this means that it doesn't retain your state. It doesn't retain the state between any communication. So it's just like saying, if you come to my shop, you buy something, and then okay, you come, you give me money, you tell me what you want to buy, I give you what you want, and you go. I don't know you again. I don't know you. If you're coming back again to buy something, that is a new request you're trying to make. I don't. So in a way, this is like saying REST API doesn't have anything like customers. It doesn't know anybody from anywhere. As the transaction, as you bring in your request and it sends you a response, it doesn't know you again. So that's a simple way of explaining the states, how REST APIs are actually stateless. So it doesn't retain state for communication between the API and its interface users. Now, the sender transfers relevant states to the receiver, such in a way that every request can be understood in isolation. So if 5 people send requests to that same API, it's going to treat each of them like new different requests. It's not going to mix them up. It's going to treat each one like, okay, this is a new request. I need to handle this. It's just like, this is like a waiter waiting for people to take orders from. When it takes your order, it treats each order in isolation. It doesn't just maybe pack all the whole orders and then give it to one person. It treats each of those requests in isolation. Then after it sends a response to the person that, or to the program that asked for that request, after sending a response, it doesn't know that, it doesn't know, like, it doesn't have any states or reference to that particular user anymore, or to that particular program. So without reference states from previous requests returned by the receiver. So that's just what I'm trying to say now. So RESTful APIs make use of HTTP. We've been hearing HTTP. So HTTP is the means of communication between the API and then whatever else is actually consuming that API. So of course, well, let's look at what HTTP. So HTTP, the full meaning of HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So HTTP is an application layer protocol that's designed to transfer information between networked devices. So this is a protocol. There are other protocols. There's TCP, there's UDP, there's this HTTP, which is the one we're actually looking at. Now, it's used to transfer information between networked devices. So, which means any device that wants to transfer information to another device, or to another, maybe to a service or to an API, using HTTP must be on the network. So that's why definitely when you're on your phone, your data needs to be on, and you need to have megabytes before you can actually. So anything you do, let's say let's pick your phone as an example. When you're on a website or you're on an app, and then you interact with that app, and let's say that app is getting data from an API, for example. As you're interacting with that app and that app is getting data for you, it's actually using HTTP to communicate with the API. Now, a REST API receives an HTTP request and sends back a response for that request. If the API receives another request, that is being treated as a new request. So this is still explaining the statelessness of REST APIs. So without HTTP, it wouldn't be easy. It won't be easy for an API and maybe a front end or other services to actually communicate with each other. It would be very, very difficult. Now, this HTTP has a kind of rule in which you have to follow to communicate. So if I'm sending a request to a server, my request needs to have a request header. It needs to have a request method. It has to have, optionally, it can have a request body. Now, those things, those request method, request header, request body, those are like the basic things you're supposed to have. There are other things that can be associated with the request. So you can have things like maybe mode, which is like cause, no cause, and the rest, and other options you can set. But the three basic ones are your header, your HTTP method, and then the body. So let's pick the header. So the header is used to pass more information to the API. So for example, as let's say as a front-end developer, if I want to make a request to an API, for example, I need to tell that API the headers. Now, things that can be contained in the header is, for example, like the content type for what you're sending to it. So the content type could be application slash JSON or application slash, I think, XML or the rest. Now, that's for the headers. So the headers just, it gives more information about, like, it describes what that request has. It might have a content type. It can have other headers, like your own predefined headers. Now, we have HTTP methods. We have different kinds of HTTP methods. We have the get method, we have the post method, we have the put method, we have delete, we have options method, and the rest. Now, get method is mainly used when you're trying to get information from a server or an API. So let's say, for example, when you go to, let's say you go to google.com, what you're doing is you're sending a get request to google.com, and then it sends you an information you get. So then, so get request is mainly used to actually get information, and then most times you don't send request bodies with get request. You just send the method as get, and then the headers you can maybe add some um, extra key and value pairs there on your headers. So this is what I mean. This is how, if I'm using something like REST API, for example, I know it's not going to, going to work here on Node. So I'm trying to simulate how I would write a request on front end. So if I want to request to a particular server on front end, I would write maybe fetch. Now remember, this is a promise. So I would say fetch, then the URL I want to request to, maybe https google.com. Then after here, so these are like what I'm going to send as like the request. So whatever I put here is going to be the request I'm sending to google.com. So I could put headers. I could say headers in here, and I could put maybe my content type for the headers. Content type. The content type can be application slash JSON. I could put authorization. If I'll need authorization for that particular request, then I could say bearer and then my authorization key. And other things. Now, this is going to be for the backend. This is going to be used to maybe carry out some instructions. Like for example, if we send multi-parts, I think more, is it form.multi-part or something like that? If we are sending a multi-part content type, then that means whatever we are sending to the server might contain picture or video or something that is not just text. But in this our case, we are just sending JSON to backend. So we have the headers there. We can now have methods or the method. So inside this method, it could be a get method, it could be a post method, it could be a put method, it could be delete method, it could be options, an option. It could be anyone. So maybe if I'm making a get request, after a get request, then I could now put in a request body. So it's optional. I could have a request body. Most times I need to stringify that. So now this response.body, I can put pretty much anything I want to put. I don't know if I want to send I don't know if I'm sending something to backend. So now let me simulate how login works. So before you log in, you don't have this authorization, right? You don't have this authorization. So you can do something like you tell it that your content type is application/JSON, then say username. Now this is what front end guys do. Username would be maybe the username you get from the form. So it might be Victor. Then password can now say do something like password, and then this password can be like the value of the password. So this is how it looks when you're making that request from front end. Then back end can get this request. So back end can get this request. So on Node.js, there's if you want to look at how maybe this is written on the back end, it's written as maybe a router somewhere. So it could be router dot get, then we have something like maybe slash here, and I'll say function. So anything that goes to that back end is it's going as a request. Then anything we are sending back is going back as a response. So that's why we have RAQ, RAS. So now we can say if we want to get this username and password from back end, we can now say maybe can say const username should be equals to request.body.username, password should be equals to, and of course you guys know that we can actually destructure this request.body. We can say username and password should be equals to request.body. So let's destructure it instead. So you can do something like this: username password should be equals to request.body. Now you have the username and password from here. This is like back end part. So let me just write back end, and then here we say maybe front end. So it's the front end, the person sending the request. Then since it's a promise, of course, now maybe after checking, maybe after processing this request here, maybe processing, we write to check the username and the password from database and everything. And maybe you want to send back a response. When I say res, so this RES stands for this response. So we now say response dot send. So now we can send the person maybe a token. Can say we can say maybe we can send the person JSON. So we can say JSON rest.json. So you can respond with JSON. Then that JSON you can say message should be okay. So that okay means you're telling them that yeah, they've they have logged in successfully. Then you can now say maybe token. For example, token should be equals to maybe a random token that the backend has generated. So that token can be random stuff. So this is what you're sending back to the user. So here the user can do dots then, and then the user can now do dots catch. So inside here, we do that. We say maybe value, and then in here you can say dots catch, and then this dot catch will contain whatever you need. If like for example, if the response came back as maybe it wasn't fulfilled, function, then maybe you can write error, then you can maybe console.log the error from here. Then most times, since this is on our front end, it might need a two dots then. So most times you just do val.json to convert it to JSON, and then here you do dot then. So then you get the data equals to, then in here is whatever you got from backend, you're converting it to JSON and then you're using it in here. So now you can now say, maybe you can write an if statement here. You can say if data dot data dot message is equals to okay, then you can decide to maybe save that user's token. So you can say maybe local storage, or you can save it somewhere, or you can decide to maybe console.log to the user that you have logged in successfully, something like that. So this is how like you make the request on front end, and then on back end, which is what we are going to write in few our next classes. This is what you now write. Now, okay, router.get at this particular route, you will destructure the username and the password from the request.body. If we wanted to access something from the headers, maybe there was something passed through the headers, you just do request.headers. The name of that particular stuff that was passed into the headers on front end. So this is how we write it. So this three dots is denoting maybe what the logic, your business logic, like how you check for the password or you check for the username, maybe on your then after that you can resolve to maybe sending the person this, can decide to send the person another response if some values were not met or something like that. So if some values were not met, I could do something like if there was no username, if there was no username and there was no password, or sorry, if there was no username or there was no password, then maybe we should send a response of maybe no token. So I'll send maybe a response of no user, okay, user input not complete. User input not complete. Then we can now write maybe else here. So then else, if those two actually exist, so if those two exist, then we can now maybe write our business logic inside here somewhere, and then send the, after writing our business logic, we can send the user maybe something else. So another way of actually writing, making this code clean is instead of writing all this. So a better way to do this would be if they don't have a username and password, you just write maybe return. Maybe you don't want to actually treat that request. So this return will actually break when it checks here and it doesn't have any username or password. Maybe it just break that statement out. So that's how that works. So then let's continue. So we'll talk about authentication and authorization. So which is the last thing today. Now, authentication is act of validating that a user is whom they claim to be, or that users are who they claim to be. So this is like gateman now, or okay, let me not use gateman. So this is like maybe you're walking into a school, and before you walk into the school, the the people at the gate say, ask you, are you a student? You say yes. They now say, okay, show me your identity. Show me your ID card. So if you show them your ID card and they can validate that the ID card is okay, it means you're a student, right? Now, staffs can have their own ID cards, right? Other people can have their own ID cards. Now, this authentication is just saying, we just want to know if you're even allowed to be here at all, at all. So if you can, if in that scenario, if you can show an ID card, then and it's confirmed that you're a student, you can be allowed into the premises of the school, right? Now, authorization in system security is the process of giving user permission to access a specific resource or function. So authorization acts as, so now after authentication comes this authorization. So after we know that you are a student, we can now tell you that, okay, you can go to this part of the school, you can enter the library, but you can't enter the, let's say, the founder's office for that school like that, or without permission, or you can't enter so and so rooms without permission. So this authorization. So authorization gives you access to a particular place based on who you are. So if we can prove that you're a student, we can tell you that you can allow you to access a particular information or go to a particular place. Else, if you're a staff, then maybe we should allow you to some certain rooms and the rest. Then if you're maybe like say a super user, for example, if you're a super user, then we can allow you access to everywhere in the school, anywhere you want to go, you can go there without restriction. So that's the main difference between like authentication and authorization. So that's how they work. Authentication, we want to know if truly you are even who you are claiming to be. After we know who you are, we can use that information to give you access to a particular place. Okay, since you say you are this person, okay, you are allowed access to go to this particular place, or to go to this particular place. You can't do this, you can't do that. So this authorization is concerned with user roles. So on a website you can have users being maybe ordinary, maybe students. You can have users that are admins. You can have users that are maybe staffs. You can have user that is maybe like the super user, for example, maybe the founder of a school or something like that. You can have those different roles. So authorization is concerned with maybe allowing these people with these particular roles access to a particular place. And then maybe authentication is just proving who you are. So with all that said, we are done for today's class. So thank you for attending today's class. So from next class, we are going to go into using NodeJS. So for you people that haven't set up NodeJS on your computer, you haven't set up NodeJS, um, you don't have VS Code, please download it, because from next class we are actually going to start using NodeJS, and we are going to start using VS Code. So for now, we are not really going to use Repel for much. We are just going to use NodeJS and VS Code. Thank you very much for joining today's class. So I see we'll meet next week, Monday. All right. So bye.